It started 15 days ago, a Friday that blurred into monotony. I was lying on the couch, scrolling through old photos, wondering when life had grown so dull. Brian, my husband, stormed into the room, his face clouded with frustration. He dropped onto the chair opposite me, rubbing his temples like the weight of the world had pressed too hard. "I'm just so tired of it all," he said, his voice tinged with defeat. "The job, the boss who never stops yelling, the grind. I feel burned out, completely drained." I sympathized, offering soft words of encouragement as he vented. But when he excused himself to bed, his exhaustion lingering like a cloud, I felt a pang of something unfamiliar. Was it guilt? Frustration? Or was it simply the realization that the spark in our lives had fizzled into nothing more than a dull glow? Later that night I thought I could reignite it. I crept into the bedroom, straddling him with a mischievous smile, trying to coax him into a playful game. But his groan of annoyance crushed my intentions. "I'm too tired for that too," he muttered, turning away. I sat there for a moment, staring at the back of his head, the silence between us louder than anything. When I slipped out of bed, I dressed quickly and left. That's how I ended up at Lisa's place. My best friend, her vibrancy always intoxicating, welcomed me with a glass of wine and an understanding smile. As I poured my frustrations out, her expression shifted. She listened intently, her eyes sparking with something unexpected. When I finished, she leaned in, her voice a low murmur. "You know," she began, swirling the wine in her glass, "Jack and I have been feeling the same way. We've been experimenting a little." "Experimenting?" I asked, curious but cautious. Lisa's grin widened. "Winging. Sharing partners. It's not as taboo as you'd think. Honestly, it's been a breath of fresh air for our relationship." Her words hung in the air and my heart raced, not from shock but something else. Something electric. She noticed, her smile turning sly. "Why don't we do it together? You and Brian, me and Jack. No pressure, just a night to see where it goes." The thought was outrageous, but the embers of my curiosity flared. Jack, her husband, had always been a quiet allure, his confidence intoxicating in a way I'd never admit aloud. I'd caught myself wondering before, fleeting moments I quickly dismissed. But now, faced with the possibility, I felt a rush of excitement. "Brian would never," I said weakly, but even as the words left my lips, I wasn't sure I believed them. Lisa leaned back, a knowing gleam in her eyes. "Think about it. You might be surprised what Brian's open to. Besides," her grin turned wicked, "I think you'd enjoy Jack's company. I know I've wondered about Brian." The confession should have been scandalous, but instead it felt liberating. As we toasted to the wild idea, a flicker of adventure stirred within me. For the first time in months, the world seemed full of possibilities. The morning sunlight crept through the blinds, pulling me from restless sleep. The house was unervingly silent, until it wasn't. "Fuck you, I hate you. I hate you." Brian's voice erupted from downstairs, sharp and venomous. My heart jumped into my throat as I bolted out of bed, barely throwing on a robe before rushing to the kitchen. There he stood, a mess of frustration and anger, his hands gripping the counter as though it was the only thing holding him together. "What the hell is going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Brian spun around, his face flushed. "My boss," he spat, his words dripping with resentment. "He dumped a mountain of work on me last night and said I had to finish it by today. Emma. My weekend. I'm done with him treating me like his personal slave." I stood there, unsure what to say. His fury radiated like heat, and I felt helpless against it. After a moment, I cleared my throat. "You know," I began cautiously, "yesterday I was at Lisa's. She, suggested something that might take your mind off things." Brian's brow furrowed, his anger momentarily giving way to curiosity. "What?" "She said we should come to a party at their place. Just the four of us, her, Jack, you and me. It's a different kind of party." For a moment I thought he might laugh or dismiss it entirely. But instead something shifted. His eyes widened slightly, a spark igniting behind the weariness. "Lisa?" he asked, his tone softening. "Yes, Lisa and Jack," I confirmed, watching his reaction closely. Brian exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. Then, to my surprise, he said, "If it helps us relax, if it means I can forget this work bullshit for one night, then fine. Let's go. I don't even care about these tasks anymore." His eagerness caught me off guard, and for a moment I just stared at him. But then the thrill of it all started to bubble in my chest. "Okay," I said, a nervous smile tugging at my lips. "Let's do it." Brian nodded, a determination in his gaze I hadn't seen in weeks. "I'll get ready." The energy in the house shifted as we both hurried to prepare. I jumped into the shower, letting the warm water wash away my doubts. I took my time making sure everything was smooth and polished, paying extra attention to the small details I usually ignored. It felt like more than just getting ready, it felt like a ritual, an act of transformation. When I stepped out, Brian was in the bathroom, his face lathered with shaving cream as he meticulously worked the razor across his jawline. His usual indifference was gone, replaced by a quiet focus that mirrored my own. We didn't say much as we got dressed, but the air between us felt lighter, charged with anticipation. I slipped into a fitted black dress, the one Brian had always liked, and added a touch of perfume. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a version of myself I hadn't seen in years. Confident, alive, ready. Brian emerged from the bedroom moments later, dressed sharply but casually. His hair neatly combed and his expression unreadable. He caught my eye and smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that made my chest ache with something close to hope. "Ready?" he asked, his voice steady but tinged with excitement. I nodded, grabbing my clutch and taking his hand. "Let's do this." As we stepped out the door, I couldn't help but wonder what the night would bring. But one thing was certain, we were stepping into uncharted territory, and there was no turning back. Lisa's house had a glow about it, a warm, golden light spilling from the windows, promising a night of escape from everything weighing us down. As Brian and I approached the door, I noticed his fingers twitching at his sides, a telltale sign of his nerves. I reached out and squeezed his hand. "It's just Lisa and Jack," I reminded him. He nodded, exhaling slowly as if releasing his apprehensions. The door swung open before we could knock. Lisa stood there, radiant and carefree, her laughter bubbling up as though she'd been waiting for us all night. "Come in," she said, waving us inside. Jack was sprawled on the couch, Lisa draped across him. They didn't bother to hide their affection. When we entered, they broke their kiss with a knowing smile, welcoming us like old friends sharing a secret. Brian gave a hesitant wave while I managed a small laugh. After a few minutes of chatting, Lisa handed us glasses of wine, her gaze playful as she leaned into Brian. "You look tense," she teased, her tone low and velvety. "Relax. We're all here to have fun." Jack grinned, his eyes flicking toward me. "Shall we get started?" he asked, his voice carrying an air of authority. Before I could respond, he was by my side, his hands gentle but deliberate as they guided me toward the couch. My dress slipped off with a casual elegance, leaving me vulnerable yet exhilarated. Jack's touch was confident, his hands pressing into my shoulders and down my back in a way that made every muscle in my body melt. His thumbs found every knot, every tension, working out stress I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. It was unlike anything I'd experienced, intensely personal yet strangely freeing. My breathing grew heavier as the moment enveloped me. I glanced at Brian, who seemed to have found his rhythm with Lisa. Her laughter rang out softly, though her words were lost to me, drowned beneath the sensations flooding my senses. Time became meaningless, the minutes stretching into an eternity of indulgence. Jack's energy was magnetic, his movements purposeful, yet it felt as though he was guiding me somewhere beyond myself. I shivered, my body reacting instinctively to the rush of new sensations. At some point, Jack reached for a nearby bottle. He held it above me, a glimmer of mischief in his eyes. I barely registered what was happening until I felt the cool, creamy texture land on my face. "Mayo!" I exclaimed, startled and laughing all at once. "Oh, you!" Jack chuckled, grabbing a towel to wipe it away. "It's part of the fun," he said, his grin widening. Despite myself, I couldn't help but laugh, the absurdity of it all breaking through the haze. Brian caught my eye, and for a moment we both shared a look, a mix of disbelief and amusement. Whatever we'd expected tonight to be, this certainly wasn't it. When I looked over at Brian, I saw him with a mischievous glint in his eye. He held his own bottle of mayonnaise, and before I could react, he tipped it over Lisa's stomach with a dramatic flourish. The creamy white condiment pooled on her skin as Brian burst out laughing, his voice echoing through the room. "Oh, Tack," he exclaimed, throwing his head back. "This is the best day this month." I couldn't help but join in the laughter. The sheer ridiculousness of it all, the moment, the carefree way everyone was behaving, was disarming. It felt good to see Brian so unburdened, so present. Lisa and I exchanged a glance and agreed wordlessly. "I need a shower," I said, still giggling as I pulled her up by the hand. "This stuff is starting to stick." We made our way to the bathroom, the sound of our laughter following us. The warm water rushed over us, washing away the mayonnaise and the last remnants of awkwardness. Lisa hummed softly as she rinsed her hair, and I leaned against the tiles, letting the moment sink in. There was no shame, no worry. Just the lightness of connection and the comfort of knowing we were all exactly where we needed to be. As we stepped out of the shower, toweling off and feeling refreshed, a sudden shout shattered the calm. "Fuck you! I quit. I'm not going to work for you, you fat fool." Brian's voice was raw, the anger spilling out like a dam breaking. Lisa and I exchanged a startled look before running back to the living room. Brian stood there, his face flushed, his phone clutched tightly in his hand. "It's my boss," he said through gritted teeth, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. "He's pushing me again. I can't. I won't do it anymore." I stepped forward, gently placing my hands on his shoulders. "Brian," I said softly, "it's okay. You need to let this go." Lisa joined me, her voice calm and soothing. "Come on, Brian. Sit down. Relax." We guided him to the couch, where I pushed him gently until he was lying down. His chest heaved with frustration, his fingers still curled into fists. "Turn off the phone," I said firmly, taking it from his grasp and placing it out of reach. "Close your eyes and think about something good. Something that makes you happy." Brian hesitated, but then he sighed and did as I said, his body slowly melting into the cushions. After a moment, he opened his eyes and looked up at me. "It worked," he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I feel better." We spent the next half hour together, the four of us sitting in a loose circle. The tension had dissipated, replaced by an easy camaraderie that felt more like family than friendship. There was no need for words. The connection between us spoke louder than anything we could say. For the first time in years, I felt utterly at ease. Walking around the house without clothes no longer felt strange or shameful. It was liberating, a step into a version of myself I hadn't realized I'd been searching for. As the evening settled into a soft hum of conversation and laughter, I leaned into Brian, my head resting on his shoulder. For the first time in what felt like forever, we were both content. Not perfect, not without flaws, but truly and deeply content. When we got home that night, Brian went straight to the shower. From the bedroom, I could hear the water running and his voice echoing through the steam. He was singing, actually singing, a carefree, upbeat tune that I didn't recognize. Between the verses, he shouted, "That was amazing. So cool." I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process everything. The day had been a whirlwind of emotions. Excitement, liberation, connection. But now, as the night settled, an unsettling doubt crept in. Brian's enthusiasm was contagious, but it also left me uneasy. When he emerged from the shower, a towel slung over his waist, His grin was as wide as I'd ever seen. "So," he said, running a hand through his wet hair, "are we going to make this a regular thing?" His words hit me like a bucket of cold water. My stomach tightened, and I forced a smile, trying to mask my discomfort. "I don't know," I said lightly, avoiding his gaze. "Maybe it's something we don't need to do too often." But before I could explain further, he clapped his hands together and announced, "I think I'll go back tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah," he said, oblivious to the unease creeping into my expression. "Why not? Was fun, right? And Lisa and Jack are so chill about everything." I didn't respond. A part of me wanted to argue, to tell him that this wasn't what I had envisioned, that it was supposed to be a one-time thing, a spark to reignite what we had, not a fire that would consume everything else. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the stress and pain he'd carried before last night, couldn't bring myself to deny him this small escape. So I stayed silent. The next morning, Brian left for Lisa's house before the sun had fully risen. He was practically skipping out the door, humming to himself. I watched him go, my chest heavy with conflicting emotions. I stayed home, telling myself that one night had been enough for me. I didn't need more. But Brian kept going. Once turned into twice, then 3 times, then 5. Each time I felt a little more invisible, a little more like I was losing him. I tried to reason with him, to explain that this was crossing a line. But every time, he brushed me off with a wave of his hand and a cheerful, "Don't worry, it's just for fun." By the 5th day, I couldn't take it anymore. I threw a full-blown tantrum, shouting and crying, begging him to stop. "You're pushing this too far," he yelled. "What about us? What about me?" But he didn't listen. Instead, he packed a small bag and walked out the door without looking back. That night, he didn't come home. And the next, when I called Lisa and Jack, their phones went straight to voicemail. I tried again and again, but eventually I realized what had happened. They had blocked me. My husband wasn't just visiting them anymore. He was staying there. With them. Without me. For the next week, I showed up at their house unannounced, desperate to talk, to fix things. But every time they shut me out. Jack wouldn't open the door. Lisa refused to meet my eyes when I caught her outside. And Brian? He didn't even bother to come to the door. Then, yesterday they moved. I don't know where they went. The house was empty, the windows dark. The life we had once shared now a hollow shell of what it used to be. They left without a trace, leaving me to pick up the pieces of a life I no longer recognized. Now, 15 days later, I sit here writing this, my heart heavy with regret. I thought that night would bring us closer, but instead, it shattered everything. I allowed myself to believe that we could handle it, that it wouldn't change us. But I was wrong. So wrong. If you're listening to this, let my story be a warning. Don't let curiosity lead you to places you're not prepared to go. Don't let fleeting moments of excitement risk the foundations of what you've built. Because once it's gone, you may not be able to get it back. Thank you for listening. I don't know what's next for me, but I hope you find the strength to hold on to the things that truly matter. So, I want to add one more thing. 6 days have passed since I wrote this story. This morning I received a text message from my husband. He asks me very much to forgive him. He writes that he realized his mistake and that he was a fool. He said that his Lisa and Jake kicked him out and he has nowhere to go. He said that he is now spending the night on the street at the train station. He wrote a lot of things. I don't even know what to say. I just blocked him. I don't want to see him. He hurt me very much, and this pain continues to this day. He chose a path that destroyed everything. I will not forgive him now. Write in the comments whether I did the right thing or whether I should have forgiven him.